The bluish glow of the computer screens flickered intermittently, filling Emily's small apartment with a cold, pulsating light. The rhythmic sound of her fingers gliding across the keyboard echoed through the room as lines of code scrolled across the screen in a hypnotic dance. She bit her lower lip, her brow furrowed, deeply engrossed in the maze of files she had just hacked into. The company, Genentech, was renowned for its breakthroughs in biotechnology, but for Emily, the interest was personal. Rumors about shadowy experiments involving human genetics had driven her to dig for the truth. The first few minutes were relatively uneventful. Genentech's cybersecurity was robust, but nothing Emily's skills couldn't overcome. She had already navigated through a few less protected folders when something caught her attention. A file labeled Project Twin. The title was vague, but the level of encryption surrounding it was what truly intrigued her. It was as if someone wanted to ensure no one ever accessed it. That only made her more determined. She activated a program to decrypt the file. Time seemed to slow as seconds stretched into minutes until the file finally unlocked. Inside, Emily found something that made her lean back in her chair. It was a video. She clicked to play it, but a warning flashed on the screen: "You are being monitored. Do not open this file." She hesitated. For a brief moment, she considered closing everything and erasing her tracks, but her curiosity was stronger. She clicked on the video, and the screen displayed a woman. Not just any woman. It was her, or at least someone identical to her. The face on the screen looked like a younger version of herself, staring directly into the camera, as if aware it was being watched. Emily felt her stomach drop. The video continued. "You have been selected. Your twin is active." Before she could process the meaning of those words, her screen flickered and abruptly shut off. The sound of her keyboard went silent, replaced by an unsettling stillness that seemed to expand across the room. Emily's heart raced as she glanced around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when she heard it, a faint noise, like something falling to the floor in another room. Emily froze. She didn't have pets, and no one else was supposed to be in her apartment. Her first instinct was to check the security cameras she had installed, but when she tried accessing them on her phone, she realized they were offline. That had never happened before. She stood up slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. She grabbed a pocket knife from a nearby drawer and moved toward the hallway. The apartment was shrouded in dense shadows, the silence almost as oppressive as the fear creeping up her spine. Each step seemed to echo on the wooden floor. As she reached the bedroom door, she stopped to listen. Nothing. She opened the door carefully, but the room was empty. Everything appeared to be in place, except for one detail. The laptop she had left on the bed was now on the floor, its screen cracked. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She hurried back to the living room, but when she arrived, something was different. The computer screen, which had been off moments ago, now displayed a single sentence in large red letters: "You were warned." Her first instinct was to run. She grabbed a backpack with her basic hacking equipment and bolted for the door, not bothering to erase her digital footprints. There was no time for caution now. As she descended the stairs of her building, her mind raced in a whirlwind of thoughts. Who had broken into her home? How did they know she was accessing that file? And most disturbingly, what did "your twin is active" mean? Once she reached the street, Emily realized she needed help. There was only one person she trusted to handle something this big: Ryan, her mentor and longtime friend. He was the only one who would understand the gravity of what was happening. She ran through the deserted city streets, staying in the shadows, with the constant feeling of being watched. In her mind, flashes of the face in the video haunted her. That woman. That copy of her. How was it possible? Emily arrived at Ryan's small studio, located in the basement of an old building. He opened the door quickly, his eyes wide with concern when he saw her. "What happened?" he asked, but Emily didn't have time for detailed explanations. "I need your help." "Now," she said, handing him a flash drive containing the data she had managed to extract before being interrupted. As Ryan analyzed the contents, Emily explained what she had seen. He remained silent, but his expression said it all. When he finally spoke, his words were even more unsettling than she had anticipated. "Emily, this isn't just hacking. This is total control. Genetech isn't just collecting data. They're playing God." Emily felt the weight of his words. Fear and adrenaline were beginning to transform her. She looked at Ryan, realizing that even he might not be able to protect her from what was coming. The silence in Ryan's studio was suffocating. The only sound came from the computer's cooling fans, filling the small room as he examined the flash drive Emily had handed him. She paced back and forth, biting her thumbnail, trying to organize her thoughts. Everything felt surreal: the face in the video, the message, the sounds in her apartment. Each piece seemed to belong to a twisted puzzle she couldn't yet solve. Ryan broke the silence with a heavy sigh. "This file is unlike anything I've ever seen," he said, swiveling his chair to face her. "Genetech is working with genetic manipulation on a level that the public can't even imagine. They're not just cloning people, Emily. They're creating better versions of them." The weight of his statement hit her like a blow. "Better?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "What does that mean?" "Better how?" Ryan gestured toward the screen. "Stronger, smarter, more resilient. It's as if each clone is engineered to be the perfect version of the original. And the scariest part? There are references to something called activation. It seems these clones aren't just copies, they're meant to completely replace the originals." Emily felt her stomach sink. The face in the video seemed closer now, more real. "Why me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why is my face in this file? I'm nobody important." Ryan hesitated, his expression unreadable. I don't know, Emily. But there's something here that might give us a clue." He clicked on a line of code, magnifying it on the screen. A sequence of numbers and letters appeared, standing out among the other data. It was a hexadecimal code that, after a quick analysis, revealed itself as an address. "It's a location," Ryan said, pointing to the monitor. "A lab or something. It could be where they're storing these copies." Emily stared at the code, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to destroy the flash drive, erase all evidence, and pretend none of this was happening. But another part of her knew she couldn't stop now. She needed answers. Before she could respond, a sound came from the studio entrance. It was low, almost imperceptible, but enough to make both of them freeze. Ryan looked at her, concern etched across his face. "Were you followed?" Emily shook her head quickly. "I was careful, But before she could finish, the sound repeated, closer this time. Ryan quickly killed the lights, plunging the studio into darkness. He motioned for Emily to stay quiet and grabbed a metal bar he kept near his desk. They waited, motionless, as footsteps approached the hallway. Emily held her breath, her body rigid. She could hear the blood pounding in her ears. Then, the studio door creaked open slowly, revealing the silhouette of a man. Before he could step fully inside, Ryan lunged, striking him with the bar. The man collapsed with a groan, but two others appeared behind him. "Run!" Ryan shouted, but Emily was already moving. She grabbed the flash drive and bolted for the secondary exit, a small trapdoor that led to an alley. The sounds of the struggle and objects crashing faded behind her as she darted down the narrow staircase. When she reached the alley, Emily glanced back briefly but didn't see Ryan. She wanted to turn around, but she knew it would be pointless. He was strong and knew how to defend himself. She had to trust he would find a way out. For now, her focus had to be on her own survival. She navigated through the deserted streets, sticking to the shadows. Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she replayed the events at the studio in her mind. Who were those men? Genetech agents? Or something worse? When she finally found a safe place, a small 24-hour cafe lit by dim yellow lights, Emily sat in a corner and plugged the flash drive into the laptop she carried in her backpack. She needed to learn more about the address Ryan had found. If he was right, it might be her only chance to understand what was going on. The address led to a laboratory in an abandoned industrial park on the city's outskirts. It was a discreet yet strategic location, ideal for anyone wanting to keep secrets hidden from the public. Emily jotted down the coordinates and closed the laptop. Her mind raced. What would she find there? More clones? Answers? Or just more questions? As she sipped on a bitter coffee to stay alert, Emily felt the weight of everything she had lost in the past few hours. Her safety, her peace of mind, maybe even Ryan. But she also knew she couldn't stop now. Not until she understood what Project Twin was and, most importantly, what her role in it was. With her backpack strapped tightly to her shoulders, she left the cafe and began planning her next move. She needed to get to that lab before it was too late. Emily parked her motorcycle on a dirt road dimly lit by a pale crescent moon. She hid it behind a line of overgrown bushes, her eyes fixed on the structure ahead. The building loomed in eerie silence, its walls stained by years of neglect. Broken windows and rusted metal hinted at abandonment, yet there was something off. The silence felt unnatural, as if even the wind refused to pass through this place. With her backpack secured tightly, Emily crept across the overgrown lot, sticking to the shadows. Every step was deliberate, her senses heightened. She reached a side entrance and noticed the door was partially ajar. There were no locks, no visible security systems, an odd choice for a facility tied to a company as secretive as Genetech. That realization only made her more cautious. The interior of the lab was a maze of shadows, illuminated by faint emergency lights still flickering along the walls. Emily switched on her phone's flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the darkness. Papers and burnt folders littered the floors, as if someone had tried to erase whatever had happened here. Despite the decay, she could sense the traces of an advanced facility once brimming with activity. Her breath caught as she entered a larger room. Rows of glass tanks stood in the center, each one connected to a network of cables and humming machines that still emitted a faint glow. The translucent liquid inside the tanks reflected her flashlight like polished mirrors. But it wasn't the tanks or the cables that froze her in place. It was what was inside them. Bodies. Each tank held a figure, a person, suspended in the liquid. And the most unsettling part was their perfection. Their features were flawless, almost inhumanly symmetrical, as though they had been sculpted rather than born. Emily hesitated before approaching one of the tanks. Her flashlight beam danced over the glass, illuminating the face of a woman floating inside. For a moment, Emily thought she was hallucinating. The woman's face wasn't just familiar, it was her own Dot. Her knees felt weak as she took a step back, the realization hitting her like a freight train. The figure inside the tank was an exact replica of her, down to the faint scar on her left cheek. Emily pressed a trembling hand against the glass, as though touching it would confirm whether it was real. Suddenly, the clone's eyes snapped open. Emily stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The clone stared at her, its gaze cold and unblinking. They remained frozen in that moment, a silent exchange of disbelief and recognition. Before she could process what was happening, a metallic voice echoed through the room. Manual activation detected. Initiating emergency protocol. Machines around the tank sprang to life, and the liquid inside began to drain rapidly. Emily's mind raced. She glanced around for a way to stop the process and spotted a control panel nearby. She darted toward it, her fingers flying over buttons and levers, but everything was locked. Meanwhile, the liquid in her clone's tank had completely emptied. The glass hissed as it began to open, releasing a plume of mist into the room. Emily watched, frozen in a mixture of terror and fascination, as the clone stepped out. It moved fluidly, unnervingly human, yet its gaze remained sharp and calculating. "What are you?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. The clone tilted its head, almost as if pondering the question. "I am you. Improved." The words sent a chill down Emily's spine. "Why me? Why my face?" "Because you are flawed," the clone replied, its voice cold and detached. "I was created to correct that." Before Emily could respond, alarms blared throughout the building. Red lights flashed in frantic rhythm, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Emily knew she didn't have much time. She grabbed her backpack and made for the nearest exit, but not before casting one last glance at the clone. It hadn't moved, standing there like a statue, watching her. Its expression was unreadable, but Emily could feel the weight of its gaze long after she turned away. The corridors were a blur as she sprinted through the labyrinthine facility. The sound of voices and heavy boots grew louder behind her. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her instincts urging her to keep moving. Reaching a small window near the end of a hallway, Emily didn't hesitate. She smashed the glass with her elbow, ignoring the sharp pain as shards cut into her skin. She climbed through the opening and tumbled into the dirt outside. There was no time to rest. She got up and ran, the sound of shouting agents fading as she disappeared into the forest surrounding the lab. Adrenaline fueled her as she made her way to her motorcycle. She reached it just as her pursuers emerged from the building. Without a second thought, she started the engine and sped off into the night, leaving the chaos behind. But even as the wind whipped against her face, Emily couldn't escape the image of her clone. The cold, emotionless stare. The words it had spoken, "I am you." Improved. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. Whatever Genetech was doing, it was far bigger than she had imagined. She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to find them, at the heart of Genetech itself. The forest felt endless as Emily ran, each step crunching over dry leaves that sounded deafening in the still night. The flashlight beams from her pursuers swept through the trees like predators hunting their prey. She kept her focus on the dark horizon, knowing that stopping now meant being caught. Her mind raced as fast as her feet, replaying everything she had learned in the lab. The clone stepping out of the tank. The chilling words, "I am you." Improved. And now, the documents and coordinates stored in her backpack. Each piece of information was a fragment of a larger truth she was desperate to uncover. After what felt like an eternity, Emily reached the outskirts of the forest. Her legs burned with exhaustion, and her breaths came in ragged gasps, but she pushed forward. Ahead, the faint outline of a small suburban neighborhood came into view. She slowed her pace as she approached a familiar house, the one where she'd grown up. Emily hadn't been here in years. The house stood exactly as she remembered it, a faint yellow glow from the porch light casting shadows across the walkway. Memories of her childhood flickered in her mind, but they were overshadowed by the pressing questions about her family's connection to Genentech. If there were answers, they would be here. She pushed open the creaky gate and followed the stone path to the front door. The air was heavy with stillness, the kind that seemed to hold secrets in its silence. Emily hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The house was untouched by time. Family photos still lined the walls, their smiling faces now appearing to mock her. She glanced at the pictures of her younger self with her parents and her sister, Lily. For years, those images had been a source of comfort. Now, they only fueled her unease. Emily began searching through drawers, cabinets, and old storage boxes. In the back of her father's office closet, she found a weathered folder hidden beneath a pile of outdated documents. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were contracts bearing the Genentech logo, stamped with the words Voluntary Participation Agreement. Flipping through the pages, Emily's pulse quickened. The contracts detailed a program offering genetic optimization for children, promising healthier, smarter, and more resilient offspring. Her parents had willingly enrolled, trusting in Genentech's promises. But it was the final section of the documents that made her blood run cold, a list of results from the experiments. Her name was there. And so was Lily's. Emily's heart pounded as she read further. Lily hadn't died in a tragic accident, as her parents had always told her. According to these documents, Lily had been marked as activated. Genentech had taken her, deeming her too valuable to remain in a normal life. The sound of footsteps creaking on the staircase broke Emily's concentration. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Standing at the top of the stairs was her mother, bathed in shadow. "You shouldn't be here," her mother said, her voice low but tinged with guilt. "You knew," Emily said, clutching the folder. "You knew what they did to us." To Lily. Her mother descended the stairs slowly, stopping a few feet away. Her face was pale, her eyes tired and haunted. "We thought we were doing the right thing," she said softly. "Genentech promised us perfection. They said you would never suffer like other children. But then..." Her voice faltered. "Then what?" Emily demanded, her anger flaring. "They killed Lily? They experimented on me?" Her mother shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Lily didn't die in the accident. It was her clone that died. The real Lily, they took her. They said it was for her safety, that she had a critical role to play in their program. But we never saw her again." Emily felt the ground shift beneath her. Everything she had believed about her childhood was unraveling. Lily, the sister she had mourned for years, was alive, or at least had been. And her own existence was tied to lies carefully constructed by the people she trusted most. Before she could process her mother's words, headlights from outside illuminated the living room. The sound of car doors slamming broke the silence. Emily ran to the window and saw several men in black uniforms emerging from SUVs. They were armed. "You led them here," Emily hissed, turning to her mother with a mix of disbelief and betrayal. "No," her mother said, her voice trembling. "I didn't. But you need to leave. Now. They know about you." Emily didn't have time to argue. She stuffed the documents into her backpack and bolted toward the back of the house. There was a gate leading into a dense wooded area, a path she had taken countless times as a child. She hoped it would provide her with enough cover to escape. The woods were dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the agents' flashlights behind her. Emily ran with everything she had, weaving between trees, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Her mind was a storm of thoughts: Lily, Genentech, the clones. She couldn't stop now. Eventually, the forest opened up to an abandoned park. Emily hid behind a rusted carousel, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The sound of footsteps and voices grew fainter, but she knew she wasn't safe yet. She clutched the straps of her backpack, her determination solidifying. Lily had been alive when Genetech took her. That meant there was a chance she was still alive now. Emily wouldn't stop until she found her. And if Genetech had taken so much from so many, it was time for someone to take it all back. The forest seemed endless as Emily followed the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. Her breath was heavy, her legs burning, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her moving. The sound of her pursuers had faded, replaced by the distant rustle of leaves. She clutched her backpack tightly, the documents inside pressing against her back, a constant reminder of the truth she'd uncovered. After what felt like hours, she reached the edge of the woods. Her feet found a narrow dirt road, its winding path barely visible in the dim light. Emily followed it, scanning for any sign of shelter. In the distance, she saw the faint outline of a small, dilapidated house. She hesitated for a moment before approaching, her instincts screaming caution, but she knew she couldn't stay exposed much longer. The house looked abandoned, its paint peeling and windows clouded with dirt. Emily knocked on the door, her knuckles grazing the weathered wood. After a few tense moments, the door creaked open. An elderly woman with sharp eyes and graying hair stood in the doorway, her expression guarded. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice steady despite the clear mistrust in her tone. "I just need a place to hide for a few hours," Emily said quickly. "I won't be any trouble, I promise. I'm running from dangerous people." The woman studied her for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in. But don't ask questions, and I won't ask any either." Emily entered, the air inside heavy with the scent of dust and age. The furniture was sparse and old, and the room was dimly lit by a single lamp. The woman motioned for her to sit in a worn chair near the fireplace and disappeared into the kitchen. Emily let out a shaky breath, setting her backpack on her lap. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the folder she'd found in her parents' house. The documents inside were both terrifying and maddening, each one painting a clearer picture of Genetech's reach. But what caught her attention now was a map tucked between the pages. It was marked with several locations, all connected to the Project Twin. One of them, labeled Central Facility, wasn't far from where she was. The woman returned with a chipped mug of tea and set it down on the table in front of Emily. "You're involved in something dangerous, aren't you?" Emily glanced up, startled. The woman sat across from her, her eyes sharper than before. "You don't have to tell me," the woman continued. "I've seen that look before. My daughter had it too, right before she disappeared." Emily's stomach twisted. "Your daughter disappeared? How? When?" "More than 20 years ago," the woman said, her voice softening. "She was bright, full of life. Then one day, these people came. They promised her a better future, said she was special. She believed them, and we never saw her again. They said it was for her own good, that she was part of something important." Emily swallowed hard, the knot in her chest tightening. The woman's story was disturbingly similar to what had happened to Lily. "Was it Genetech?" she asked carefully. The woman's expression darkened. "Yes. That's the name. They took her and never looked back." Emily leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. How many lives had Genetech torn apart? How many families had been manipulated into giving up their children for this so-called progress? "I'm going after them," Emily said suddenly, her voice firm. If my sister is still alive, I have to find her. And if they're responsible for this, they can't keep doing it." The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. She stood and disappeared into another room, returning moments later with an old, battered radio. "Take this. It's tuned to a private frequency. If you get into trouble, call for help. Someone will hear you." Emily accepted the radio with a murmured thanks. The weight of her mission felt heavier than ever, but the woman's quiet resolve gave her a small spark of hope. She left the house and followed the map toward the central facility. The road was long and winding, but Emily's determination propelled her forward. As she walked, she replayed the woman's words in her mind, her heart aching for all the families who had lost someone to Genetech's experiments. Hours later, Emily reached the facility. It was hidden in plain sight, a cluster of nondescript buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence. The dull hum of machinery could be heard even from a distance, and faint lights flickered through the thick fog that clung to the area. Emily crouched behind a tree, observing the layout. The facility was heavily guarded, with patrols weaving in and out of the gates. This wasn't going to be easy. She adjusted her backpack, steeling herself for what was to come. The sound of boots crunching on gravel snapped Emily out of her thoughts. A patrol was heading in her direction. She pressed herself against the tree, holding her breath as the guards passed mere feet from her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she remained still, waiting for the shadows to disappear. Once the coast was clear, she moved quickly, using the cover of darkness to approach the fence. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a pair of wire cutters, slicing through the chain link with deliberate precision. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness, but no alarms went off. Slipping through the gap, Emily kept low as she crossed the open yard. Her goal was a side entrance marked on the map, an old maintenance door that appeared to have been forgotten. When she reached it, she found it locked with an electronic keypad. She retrieved a small hacking device from her bag, connecting it to the panel. After a few tense moments, the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, the facility was a stark contrast to its exterior. The walls were pristine, the air cool and sterile. Bright overhead lights illuminated a network of corridors, each one eerily quiet. Emily moved cautiously, her footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. She followed the map to what appeared to be the central control room. As she approached, her nerves buzzed with anticipation. If there were answers to be found, they would be here. But Emily knew she couldn't let her guard down, not with Genetech watching her every move. The central facility loomed in front of Emily like a fortress, its facade plain and unassuming, but bristling with security. Tall fences wrapped around the building, topped with razor wire. Cameras scanned the area, their mechanical eyes sweeping over every corner. The faint hum of generators buzzed in the air, underscoring the tension that gripped her. This was it, Genetech's heart, the place where Project Twin operated at full capacity. Emily adjusted her backpack and crouched behind a tree, observing the guards who patrolled the perimeter. She had been tracking their movements for nearly an hour, noting the gaps in their routines. The timing would have to be perfect. She couldn't afford a single mistake. When the moment came, Emily moved quickly, darting toward a section of the fence where one of the cameras momentarily shifted its gaze. She cut through the chain link with wire cutters, wincing at the metallic snap that sounded too loud in the quiet night. Slipping through the opening, she kept low, her heart pounding as she crossed the open yard. Reaching the side entrance marked on her map, she pulled out her hacking device and connected it to the keypad. The seconds felt like hours as the device worked, decrypting the lock's code. Finally, with a soft beep, the door clicked open. Emily slipped inside, the sterile air of the facility hitting her like a wall. The interior was cold and eerily silent, illuminated by stark white lights. The hallways stretched out in every direction, pristine and devoid of any signs of life. Emily moved cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the polished floors. She clutched her backpack tightly, following the map toward her destination, the server room. As she turned a corner, she spotted a camera mounted on the ceiling. Emily pressed herself against the wall, waiting for it to swivel away before darting past. Her heart raced with every step, her mind calculating her next moves. The server room was located in the far wing of the building, behind a reinforced door requiring both a keycard and biometric verification. Emily hid behind a stack of crates nearby, waiting for an opportunity. Minutes later, her chance arrived. A technician approached the door, engrossed in his tablet. Emily moved swiftly, striking the back of his neck with the edge of her hand. The man crumpled to the floor without a sound. She dragged his unconscious body behind the crates, removing his keycard and lifting his hand to the biometric scanner. The door unlocked with a soft beep. Inside, the server room hummed with energy. Towers of computers blinked with green and blue lights, the air thick with the low whir of cooling fans. Emily wasted no time, connecting her laptop to one of the terminals. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she downloaded the files she needed. As the data transferred, Emily scanned the files. What she saw made her stomach turn. There were plans for global activation, a coordinated effort to replace key figures in governments and industries with clones. Genetech wasn't just building perfect replicas, they were orchestrating a takeover. The realization hit her like a blow. They weren't just experimenting with humanity. They were rewriting it. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, breaking her concentration. Emily yanked the laptop's cable free and stuffed it back into her bag. She ducked behind a server tower just as two guards entered the room. "Someone's been in here," one of them said, glancing at the unlocked terminal. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding as the guards scanned the room. One of them moved closer to her hiding spot, his boots clanging against the metal floor panels. She tightened her grip on the pocket knife in her hand, ready to act. The guards stopped short of her position. "Let's check the next room," one of them said, and they exited as quickly as they'd entered. Emily exhaled slowly, giving them a few seconds to move down the hallway before slipping out of the room. The alarm didn't sound immediately, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She needed to leave. Fast. As she retraced her steps, the faint sound of boots echoed behind her. Emily picked up her pace, turning a corner only to find herself face to face with another figure. But this wasn't just another guard. It was her clone. The copy stared at her with cold, calculating eyes. There was no shock, no surprise, just an eerie sense of recognition. "You're persistent," the clone said, its voice a near-perfect echo of Emily's. "But it won't make a difference. You can't stop this." Emily clenched her fists, her mind racing. "Where's Lily?" she demanded. The clone tilted its head, a faint smirk playing at its lips. "Your sister already served her purpose. Now it's your turn." Rage flared inside Emily, but she held herself back. The clone's calm demeanor only made her more determined. "You think you can take my life, take everything from me, and I'll just let you?" Emily said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath it. "You don't understand," the clone replied. "This isn't about taking your life. It's about perfecting it." Before Emily could respond, alarms blared through the facility. Red lights flashed in rhythmic pulses, and the sound of boots rushing toward her position grew louder. Emily took advantage of the distraction, shoving the clone aside and sprinting down the hallway. The building erupted into chaos as guards flooded the corridors. She weaved through them, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she searched for an exit. The maintenance door she'd entered through was no longer an option. Emily spotted another path leading to a loading dock and sprinted toward it. The doors were partially open, and she slid through the gap just as more guards rounded the corner. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap. She didn't stop running until she reached the fence, ducking through the hole she had cut earlier. By the time she reached the tree line, the facility was a cacophony of sirens and shouts. But even as she disappeared into the forest, her thoughts weren't on her escape. They were on the clone's words and the plans she had uncovered. Genetech's ambitions were far greater than she had imagined, and she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. This was bigger than her. And she was just getting started. The night was colder and darker as Emily pushed her way through the dense forest, her breath visible in the icy air. Every muscle in her body ached, but she forced herself to keep moving. The weight of the backpack on her shoulders wasn't just physical, it carried the burden of everything she'd uncovered. Genetech's plans for global replacement weren't just terrifying, they were imminent. She didn't have time to stop. After hours of trekking, Emily stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin hidden in the heart of the woods. It looked as though it hadn't been used in years, but it was shelter. She cautiously entered, her flashlight sweeping over the dusty interior. The place smelled of mildew and decay, but it was quiet, and for now, that was all she needed. Emily barricaded the door with a broken chair and collapsed in a corner. Her chest heaved as she caught her breath, and she slid the backpack onto the floor. Opening her laptop, she began reviewing the files she'd stolen. Each new document only deepened the dread gnawing at her. Among the files was a list of high-priority replacements, world leaders, CEOs, and scientists, all targeted for cloning and activation. But what sent a chill through her was her own name, marked with the label Elimination Protocol, active. They weren't just watching her anymore. They decided she was expendable. Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. They had already taken so much, her sister, her safety, her past. She refused to let them take her future. But before she could form a plan, a noise outside snapped her attention to the door. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy, crunched on the frost-covered ground. Her heart raced as she reached for the pocket knife in her boot. The footsteps stopped just outside the cabin. The door shook as it was forced open, the makeshift barricade splintering. Emily backed into the shadows, clutching the knife tightly. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted by the moonlight. "You're resourceful," the figure said, the voice unmistakably hers. Emily's clone stood in the doorway, calm and composed, as though it had all the time in the world. "But you should have known there's no running from this." "What do you want?" Emily demanded, her voice sharp. The clone stepped further into the room, its cold gaze never leaving hers. "You've taken something that doesn't belong to you. You're interfering with progress. But more than that. You've become a liability." Emily gritted her teeth, the weight of the knife heavy in her hand. "You're not going to replace me." The clone tilted its head, a faint smirk curling its lips. "Replace you? I'm already better than you. Faster, stronger, smarter. You're just a glitch we need to fix." Before Emily could respond, the clone lunged. Emily barely dodged in time, the blade of her knife catching the edge of the clone's sleeve. The fight was brutal and chaotic, every move a deadly reflection of the other. It was like fighting her own shadow, but this shadow didn't tire. The clone slammed Emily into the wall, the impact forcing the air from her lungs. She collapsed to the ground, her vision swimming. The knife slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. "You can't win," the clone said, standing over her. "You were never meant to." Emily's eyes darted to her backpack, still open on the floor. The laptop screen glowed faintly, displaying a countdown she had started before the clone entered. Her last-ditch plan, a timed virus set to dismantle Genentech systems and trigger a chain reaction in their facilities worldwide. "You're wrong," Emily said, her voice steady despite the pain. "I already have." The clone's eyes flicked to the screen, its calm composure faltering for the first time. "What did you do?" Emily seized the moment of hesitation, grabbing a piece of broken wood from the floor and swinging it with all her strength. The clone staggered back, giving Emily enough time to grab her laptop and bolt for the door. She sprinted into the forest, the cold air burning her lungs. Behind her, she could hear the clone shouting, its voice growing fainter as she put distance between them. The countdown on her laptop continued ticking down. The map from the stolen files had shown another Genentech site nearby, a command hub she hoped would have the power to finish what she'd started. The forest thinned as Emily approached, revealing an unassuming building half buried in the ground. Its entrance was camouflaged, but the coordinates matched. Emily slipped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The interior was stark and sterile, similar to the facility she had just escaped, but smaller. She followed the map's directions to the control room, her adrenaline surging as the countdown neared its final moments. The control room was dominated by a central terminal, surrounded by screens displaying live feeds from other Genentech facilities. Emily plugged in her laptop and began uploading the virus. The system resisted at first, but she overrode its defenses, watching as the screens flickered and filled with error messages. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind her. Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard, her heart pounding. She didn't turn around until the virus was fully uploaded. "You just don't know when to quit," the clone said, entering the room. Its voice was colder now, its movements more deliberate. Emily turned to face it, her body tense. "If quitting means letting you win, then no. I don't." The clone lunged, and the two collided in a flurry of punches and grapples. Emily's body screamed in protest, but she refused to give up. Every move was a battle of wills, her determination clashing with the clone's calculated efficiency. In a desperate final push, Emily managed to shove the clone into the central terminal. Sparks flew as the machinery shorted out, and the room was bathed in red emergency lights. The clone stumbled, its expression briefly flickering into something almost human, confusion, or perhaps fear. The building trembled as explosions echoed from deeper within. Emily grabbed her laptop and ran, the countdown hitting 0 just as she reached the exit. The night sky was ablaze with fire as the facility collapsed behind her. Emily fell to her knees a safe distance away, her chest heaving as she stared at the destruction. The virus had worked. Genentech's network was crumbling, its secrets exposed. But the victory was bittersweet. Emily knew this wasn't the end. Genentech was larger than one facility, and the clone's words lingered in her mind. "You were never meant to win." She rose slowly, her body aching but her resolve stronger than ever. If they wanted a war, she would give them one. Emily woke with a low groan, her head pounding and her body feeling heavy, as though it didn't quite belong to her. The light above her was dim yet sharp enough to force her eyes shut again. The air smelled faintly of metal and chemicals, and the steady hum of machinery filled the room. Slowly, memories began to filter back, the fight with her clone, the explosions at the facility, the fire raging behind her as she ran. But now, where was she? When she opened her eyes again, the stark white walls around her came into focus. She was lying on a metal bed, cables trailing from her arms to a console nearby. Monitors blinked in rhythmic patterns, their soft beeps syncing with her heartbeat. Panic bubbled in her chest as she tried to move, her limbs sluggish and uncooperative. She glanced down at her hand, and what she saw made her blood freeze. Her skin was smooth, too smooth. No scars, no imperfections. She clenched her fist, and the movement felt foreign, mechanical almost. You're awake. The voice was cold, clinical, and unmistakable. Emily turned her head toward the doorway, where a figure stood silhouetted against the light. It stepped forward, and her stomach twisted. It was her clone. "Welcome to your upgrade, Emily," the clone said, a faint smirk tugging at its lips. Emily's mind reeled. What? What did you do to me? You were destroyed, the clone replied matter-of-factly, its voice devoid of emotion. But thanks to Project Twin, you've been reconstructed. Congratulations. You're one of us now. No, Emily muttered, shaking her head. That's impossible. I'm me. This is my body. The clone's smirk widened, its eyes gleaming with something close to amusement. Your body? Not anymore. The original Emily Morris is gone. What's left is a perfected version, a better version. Emily sat up slowly, her muscles responding faster now. She stared at her hands, flexing her fingers, trying to reconcile what the clone was saying. Why bring me back? You have hundreds of clones. What do you need me for? The clone stepped closer, its gaze unflinching. Because you're special. Your resilience, your determination, they make you unique. Even when faced with death, you chose to destroy everything to protect your cause. That makes you valuable. Emily's jaw tightened. Valuable for what? The clone tilted its head, studying her like a specimen under a microscope. You're the key to something greater. You just don't realize it yet. Rage boiled inside Emily, but she forced herself to stay calm. She scanned the room, noting every detail, the cables, the monitors, the console beside her bed. There had to be a way out. You know what's funny? Emily said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You clones think you're better than us, but you keep making the same mistake. The clone's brow furrowed slightly. And what mistake is that? Underestimating what makes us human, Emily replied, before lunging at the console. Her hands moved quickly, ripping cables free and slamming buttons. Alarms blared, and the room bathed in red light as the system began to fail. Sparks flew from the console, and the clone darted forward, grabbing Emily's arm in an iron grip. What are you doing? It hissed, its calm veneer cracking. Emily met its gaze, her voice sharp and defiant. Finishing what I started. She yanked herself free and drove her fist into the clone's chest, sending it stumbling backward. The red lights flickered, and the hum of machinery turned into a high-pitched whine. Emily knew she didn't have much time. She grabbed her backpack, ignoring the searing pain in her muscles, and bolted out the door. The hallways were eerily similar to the other Genetech facilities she had infiltrated, cold, sterile, and devoid of life. But now, alarms echoed off the walls, and the tremors beneath her feet told her the self-destruct sequence was already underway. She rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. Another clone stood in her path, its expression eerily calm. You won't make it out, it said. Emily didn't answer. She ducked as it lunged for her, using its momentum to shove it against the wall. She didn't wait to see if it got up. She ran, her breaths ragged and her heart pounding. The exit was close. She could see the faint outline of a door ahead, light spilling through its edges. The building groaned as explosions erupted deeper within, the force shaking the ground beneath her. She burst through the door into the cold night air, the fresh wind stinging her face. She kept running, not stopping until she was far enough to collapse onto her knees. Behind her, the facility was engulfed in flames, each explosion lighting up the dark sky. Emily stared at the destruction, her chest heaving. She had done it. Genetech's core facility was gone. But as the fire roared, consuming everything, she couldn't ignore the hollow ache in her chest. She looked down at her hands again, flexing her fingers. They moved like hers, felt like hers, but were they really? How much of her was still Emily Morris? How much had been replaced? The clone's words echoed in her mind. You're the key to something greater. Emily stood slowly, her body aching but her resolve unshaken. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear: Genetech wasn't finished, and neither was she. The files she had stolen hinted at other facilities, other experiments. There were still people out there who needed saving. If they want a war, Emily muttered, staring into the distance, they'll get one. She turned and walked into the shadows, the flames behind her casting long, flickering shapes across the forest. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone Genetech had taken, for the lives they had twisted and destroyed. And she wouldn't stop until they were finished.